Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live stream. My name is Melissa Wilson, and I'm a senior economist here at CEDA, the Committee for Economic Development of Australia. I'm the facilitator for today's discussion, where we will discuss how workplaces are embracing the new BAU, or business as unusual. Now, we're dialing in from all over the country today, so let me begin by acknowledging that, of course, today and every day we are on Aboriginal land. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. At CEDA, we believe that it is critical that Indigenous perspectives are not only heard, but are embedded in the policy-making process if we want to deliver better outcomes for communities. A big thank you to our major sponsors for today's live stream, LHH, for generously supporting this discussion. We're looking forward to an interesting conversation today, and we really want that conversation to be driven by you, our audience. So we really ask everybody to actively participate today. And you can do that by asking questions and by voting on your favourite questions via the Pigeonhole app. Access details for Pigeonhole should be on the screen now, or you can scroll down to below the live stream for access. The Pigeonhole password for today is BAU24. Today's topic is about how workplaces are embracing the new normal. In the aftermath of the pandemic, many hoped for a return to business as usual, but by now it's clear that that's not very likely. Instead, we find ourselves in a world of massive change. Businesses today are operating in what researchers call a VUCA world, one that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. In that world, businesses must navigate important megatrends: demographic change, geopolitical shifts, climate and energy transition, new technologies, and new ways of working. At CEDA's AI Leadership Summit last week, Christina Montgomery, who's the Chief Trust and Privacy Officer at IBM, commented that change will never be as slow as it is now. In this rapidly changing environment, it is this that led CEDA to undertake research on dynamic management capabilities. These capabilities enable firms to sense opportunities, seize them, and transform their businesses around them. We found that the most dynamic firms were also more innovative, productive, and profitable during the highly uncertain pandemic period. We've also examined work from home, and our research unpacked this, which is one of the most rapid shifts we've seen in ways of working. And our analysis showed significant benefits to cohorts of workers who were previously limited in how they were able to engage with the workforce: mothers of small children, carers, and people with a health condition or disability that affects their ability to work. Today, I look forward to learning more about how the workplace landscape has irrevocably changed since COVID and how leaders can navigate and adapt to the changing world. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our three panelists today. Please welcome Tim Bradley, Strategic Advisor, Digital Economy for Amazon Web Services. Welcome, Tim. We also have James McIlvena, Managing Director for Australia, New Zealand and Singapore for LHH. Welcome to James. And Sharon Parker, who is the John Curtin Distinguished Professor at Curtin University. Welcome, Sharon. It's great to have you, all three of you, with us today. We're just going to start off with a brief introduction to the topic from each of you. Tim, if I could throw to you first, please.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Mel, and thanks to CEDA for inviting me today. This is a really fascinating topic and something I'm really excited to see where it goes. So, hello everyone. My name is Tim Bradley. I'm what's called a strategic advisor at Amazon Web Services. My particular focus is on all things to do with the digital economy. Perhaps just a bit of background: Amazon Web Services is the cloud computing arm of Amazon.com. It is the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud, offering over 200 fully featured services, including everything from HPC, AI, digital twins, IoT, quantum, and much more. Millions of customers around the world, including startups, major enterprises, universities, and leading government agencies. We launched our first region in Australia in Sydney in 2012, and now we employ more than 7,000 people across the country, with plans to invest, I think, more than $13 billion between 2020 2023 and 2027. Yeah, again, thank you very much. I'm really excited to see where this goes. It's obviously, I think I'm here because of the disruption and the AI and the technology that's kind of affecting so many of CEDA's members and people are all through the country. So, yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Mel.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Tim. James.
Yeah, Melissa, look, absolute pleasure. This is my favourite topic. I spend a great deal of my day and time talking about this very topic. And we like to ensure that, our point of view is research backed. So starting in 2019, the Adecco Group and LHH started a global workforce of the future survey and then create a report off the back of the responses. We've just released 2024 results, and the report examines the world of work through the lens of 30,000 workers from 23 countries and 25 different industries, and it spans everything from entry-level workers to senior executives. This year's survey really sought to identify the global workforce readiness for digitisation and also the worker sentiments around job security and what are their expectations for the future. Based on the identified trends and sentiments, it contained recommendations to help organisations future-proof their workforce and really spur the passive talent pool into action. Over the years, since 2019, we've looked at everything from COVID trends, the bounce back in hiring numbers across 2021 and 2022, for anyone who remembers all the topics around the Great Resignation. And then more recently, it's pivoted to look at the disruption across industries and the drive and need for adaptability and flexibility. The core findings of our report underline the importance of these following things: leadership, skills training, opportunities for internal mobility, and crucially, it shows that employee satisfaction and retention is closely related to how companies build and create a culture that fosters career growth and skills development. And beyond the data in the report, our experience has been that there's often a void in expectations between employers and employees, which prevents the amount of desired ongoing learning and skill acquisition being fully realised. Without it being addressed, the foundations through which organisations can thrive and adapt won't be set in place. So why the disconnect? I mean, for us, it's clear that there's an absolute importance of having a great workforce plan backed up with business engagement and sponsorship to train and deploy people into new roles. The key themes regarding skills training is when it's completed, is it on their own time or is it fully paid through the organisation? And even then, where is the clear connection to outcomes from their time investment in that learning? This often plays out from our experience in either a disappointing take-up if it's self-driven learning without a clear connection to an outcome, but really high demand for reskilling programs where there's a connection to new roles at the completion of the learning journey.
Great, thanks so much. Really comprehensive research there with some really interesting insights. Sharon, bring you in now. Can we have some opening thoughts from you on the topic, please?
Thank you so much, Melissa, and hello, everyone. My name's Professor Sharon Parker. I'm a professor of organisational psychology, and that's a topic that I've been exploring for many decades, looking at all sorts of things, job performance, work stress, and more. What I will particularly, I hope the message that I can help encourage you to take away today is the enduring importance of this topic of work design. So really thinking, and James mentioned the importance of culture in terms of promoting a learning and agile workforce. I would add to that the power of work design. That's a topic, as I say, I started investigating way back in the 1990s in the heart of the industry in the UK, in Sheffield, looking at self-managing teams, which is a quite radical form of work design, looking at those sorts of work designs in steelwork companies, if you can believe that. Right up to today, we're looking at the topic of work design. We're focusing on many different projects, but one, just to give you a flavour, is looking at work design in the context of aged care, disability care, and other forms of care. And many of you would agree this is an absolutely critical area and yet we've got a workforce that's burnt out, exhausted, underdeveloped. And so it's amazing to me that the 30 years has gone by, and yet those principles and power actually of work design remain today. So I guess I'm looking forward to a conversation, and that's what I'd like you to take away from my thoughts today.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Sharon. As I said, everybody, we're really keen to hear from our audience today. So do join the discussion by asking questions and voting on your favourite questions. Jump into the Pigeonhole app to do that. We might not get through every question that pops up, but I will do my best to get through as many as we can, and your votes will help me to prioritise the most burning questions from today's audience. So do jump in and get active on the Pigeonhole app. While we wait for those questions to come through, we'll have one each for our panelists. Sharon, let's continue that discussion around work design. What themes are really emerging from your research in that space, and what strategies should leaders be thinking about in the current environment when it comes to work design?
Yeah, great. Well, look, there's I guess 3 areas where work design is really coming to the fore. One is in terms of, I mentioned already, burnout, stress. So there's new work health and safety legislation, which has made it even clearer that employers have got a responsibility to make sure that work does not cause harm, not just physical harm, but psychological harm. So work design is a very powerful strategy for making sure those psychosocial hazards, as it's called, are addressed. We're also seeing work design really important in this topic of hybrid work. As you would know, KPMG released a report recently saying that 80% of CEOs, or some large number of CEOs, think everyone's going to be back in the office 9 to 5, 5 days a week in 3 years. Actually, I disagree with them. But that's another question about work design. How do we design work so we get the benefits of both in the office, but also some flexibility for people? And then there's a third theme really around AI and digital preparedness. What is it we need to do to really transform organisations? And work design plays a central role in that. So I'll come back to that theme later, but I'd just like to articulate the smart work design model, if I may, Melissa, because people are probably sitting there going, oh, what is work design? I don't even know what she's talking about. So the smart model is really a model that we've developed to capture, as I say, 100 years of research on what is it that is psychologically important for people in their work. So S is for stimulating. Having interesting, challenging, meaningful, somewhat complex work, actually really important for stimulating growth and development, which James has already mentioned is so key. M is for mastery. People need to know what it is they're actually doing in their work, so they need to know what's the end goal, what's their responsibilities. They need to get a bit of feedback on how they're tracking on that journey. A is for agency, or we sometimes call it autonomy. The importance of people being in control, being able to shape their work world, might be choosing where and when they work. So here's where the flexible agenda comes in, but it's also about having some influence over their work methods, the timing of what they do, having a voice in change. R is for relational, and I like to say this is one we discovered during COVID, because suddenly everyone was like, oh, wow, we need to connect with people. So relational work design is all about making sure we design work so that people can connect and get high quality support from their peers, from their supervisors, and also feel that they're making a difference actually to other people and the world. And then the last component is T, and that's about the importance of having tolerable demands. And I like to say this is the big one, because I have to say in most organisations where we work, achieving tolerable demands is challenging. So demands are things like workload, emotional demands, can be physical, can be cognitive, but whatever demands you have in your work, they need to be demands that you can cope with. They need to be manageable. And so the T is all about making sure the demands, the works, the goals are tolerable for people. So that was a long answer, Melissa, but hopefully that's just laid the foundation now for some of the subsequent conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's really helpful, Sharon. That's a great framework for thinking about things. Do you think that's broadly applicable across all types of work, knowledge economy, blue collar, right across the board?
Absolutely. We've been using it in all those contexts, but it's also derived from research, as I say, 100 years of research in different contexts. And I guess if I can just say, whilst we're talking about, things changing, one thing that doesn't really change is the psychology of humans. So, we have these fundamental needs to connect, to make a difference, to have some control, and they're not really changing. So the model is really premised on the things about humans that are not changing, and therefore that we need to make sure we can gather and have in workplaces.
That's great. That's really useful research. Thanks, Sharon. James, I might move over to you if that's okay. Our audience are quite interested in the research. There's a question that says, is your research publicly available? So number one, is it publicly available?
It is. It's just been released about a week ago globally, and we'll be creating a series of point of views from the global research and be releasing them over the coming months.
Fantastic. And then just following on from that, you outline those themes that have come through from that very extensive survey across the globe, across industries and countries. Can you give us some practical examples of how leaders are addressing some of those issues that really came through strongly in that piece of work?
Yeah, and look, while I don't mind sort of healthy debate, actually everything we're seeing from the report, particularly worker preferences, backs up exactly what Sharon's just taken you through. And so some of these key trends, and I'll get to the practical application, is that, there's still a degree of global uncertainty causing workers to be more reticent to move and stay put in the short term. But it's very clear they're still eager for new opportunities and they're prepared to change jobs to make the most of their potential still. And what that means for employers is there's often a significant passive talent pool that are in need of a nudge to show them where to go, how the company's going to invest in them. And if that's not done, they risk either A, falling behind from market demand in their particular professions, or the employers are burdened with disengaged employees or employees that are taking up roles but lack the skills to really make that transformational journey and improve the future of the business. And so, what we're seeing now, and Sharon touched on a lot of this stuff around the embedding of flex work arrangements, newer concepts like trials of 4-day working weeks, all which are based around the need to attract, keep and engage their employees. And while the reports are now showing we're well beyond sort of that great resignation phase, questions around from employers, particularly around what new normal looks like, they're still prevalent. And if we're answering the question, are employees really happy now? Study shows not really. You've got rising prices, international conflict, the emergence of AI. The thing that they're really valuing at the moment is more control over their future. And employees, particularly high performers, are really hungry for skilled leadership, mentoring, more training, and access to more opportunities. And so we're seeing from the research in 2024, learning on the job is a critical new job perk for people. It's something people are seeking out. They really want a role to feel important and a role in which they're progressing and learning. And this has also become increasingly more complex, but still achievable in a hybrid or virtual working environment. So in the past, the ability to actually learn from people organically and listen and overhear things they were doing happens less naturally in a hybrid or virtual working environment, but with some effort, it can still occur quite easily. And so realizing the potential of your employees is one of the biggest challenges we'll face in the next decade. Tangible examples of that, which companies can invest in, are developing stronger leaders, creating clear pathways and an understanding to the skills training available to their people, ensuring that there is absolute transparency and a process around internal mobility for existing staff, and beyond that, a clear mandate and directive that they are looking to hire and promote and train and upskill internally versus looking externally. And this often involves non-linear career pathing, which helps workers find their footing. And for those that are not familiar with non-linear career pathing, it's that my next role isn't always just my manager's role. How do people pick up a breadth of experience in order to be able to help them to continue progressing rather than feeling like they're stuck in a logjam to be able to move vertically into the next role when it comes to seniority? So my takeout and the practical solution be that if you're investing in your workforce, companies can actually turn holistic talent acquisition and retention strategies into a huge competitive advantage and one that helps them keep pace with their markets.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, James. We'll come back to that skills piece, I think, because there's a few questions coming through on that. But before we do, Tim, if I can move to you, please. Obviously, every organisation is dealing with seemingly unending change at the moment, and James touched on some of those changes that everyone is grappling with. And in that environment, staying agile and adaptable is really critical to success. And AWS is at the forefront of the AI transition. So can you speak from your own, from the AWS perspective, how are you guys building and developing agility within your leaders and teams?
Yeah, thanks, Mel. I guess it's kind of maybe just a quick kind of personal reflection. So I've been with AWS now for about 3 years, and I still think I'm caught by surprise by the differences within AWS compared to other environments where I've worked in the past. And I haven't come from a tech background, much more public policy, but that tech sector culture of moving fast, being agile, it's real, it's lived, it's baked in. So Amazon, we have like others, we have what we call our leadership principles. We have 14 of them. And they're things like invent and simplify, customer obsession, bias for action, deliver results. It's kind of, they're there, sure, and I think lots of organizations have them, but kind of they're the things that we hire against, we promote against, that actively reflected in internal rewards and recognition programs. It's really agility, innovation culture. Mostly every time the new business case is being for a new initiative or kind of outsources. Beyond, again, culture-wise, it's kind of within AWS about it always being day one, for example, and that's about maintaining an agile startup mentality. And it's, yes, there are traits of what day one looks like, but I find that two. And what day two is concentrated decision making. How do you actively guard against kind of being stale, I suppose? Emphasizing one-way doors versus understand the difference between one-way doors and two-way doors, building two pizza teams, use of mechanisms with inspection. So that's in AWS. Externally, so I guess one of the value adds, or one of the insights that often our customers and organizations will come to AWS is about understanding more of that secret sauce, that culture of innovation that underpins Amazon and the products, services, and kind of business models that we've built over the years. I think every organization wants to innovate. I think that's probably true, and I think the hard part, or the problem nations face, is more knowing about what to innovate first, kind of how to direct that intent. And I think that's a real skill. So, like, how do you build the right thing? How do you do it quickly? And we have teams that kind of actively work with a customer to go through our Amazon culture of innovation and our working backwards processes. It's a facilitated day or workshop involves developing personas, identifying pain points, ultimately working towards the development of some kind of minimal lovable product. And along the way, you produce artifacts like a press release and an FAQ, some visuals. It's a really kind of tangible exercise. I think one of the more interesting bits of feedback we get from those working backwards workshops is that it's often the first time that a customer's entire team has come together to have that discussion. Yes, it's being facilitated by AWS, and it's great, but you've got the tech team, with the marketing team, with the customer team, with the strategy team, all kind of coming together for the first time to talk about this. And I think that's really in a holistic way. That's really kind of it gives a lot of insight. We're also quite lucky in Australia to have in our Melbourne office what we call our AWS Builder Studio. And the Builder Studio is a place where customers and organizations can come and physically see demonstrations of AI innovations that we've helped to develop elsewhere, and kind of get that sense of what's possible and kind of get their imaginations going. But then sit down in an innovation space covered in whiteboards and kind of butcher's paper and so on, and then workshop with a 3D printer, circuit maker, and so on to kind of move from idea through problem to physical thing. That's the appropriate way. And there's two of those in the world. There's one here in Melbourne, which is great, and the other one's in New York, which is highly popular as well.
Great, thank you, Tim. We'll move to some of our audience questions now, and we've got currently the top voted question from people are very kindly putting their names on. Sometimes they're all anonymous, but this one's from Professor Greg Bamber from Monash University. So thank you, Professor, for your question. And I'll throw this one out to the panel. It's about the introduction of AI and other new technologies in workplaces. And to what extent should managers try to foster co-design and joint decision-making involving the voices of employees and the unions that may represent them? Or do you think that that's not appropriate because it might delay or frustrate innovations? I'll open that to anybody who'd like to jump in from our panel. Yeah, Sharon.
May I jump in?
Absolutely.
And hello, Greg. I know Greg. Look, whilst there is an argument for, some top-down design, because of the nature of the new technologies, digital technologies, and the fact that they actually evolve in the workplace, because they're often based on big data and the big data learning, it is increasingly important to capture the voice of the worker in the co-design. So we're doing a lot of research at the moment looking at how do you implement and design technologies and in a way that actually results in take-up? Because let me tell you, there's a lot of evidence out there of failure because, in a sense, there's too much emphasis on technology. Let's get the technology perfect, and then we're going to plop it into this workplace and somehow expect that it's going to integrate seamlessly into everybody's workflow and people are going to use it. That doesn't happen most of the time. So it's absolutely critical most of the time that employees are involved in that co-design piece. And that's where you get the real benefit of these technologies. The successes that I've seen have come where that has happened. Actually, we even need to go further up the chain, I would argue, not just have employees and frontline and managers involved in the implementation of technology, but increasingly actually shaping the design of the actual technology to begin with. So that's my 2 cents. I think it's absolutely crucial. And I think that's where we'll get the real benefit of technology as opposed to no one trusting it or over trusting it, which is another problem, and resulting in the various failures that we've seen too often.
Thanks so much, Sharon. Tim, you might have a view on this because we were talking a little earlier about overemphasis on the technology and the hard skills as opposed to the soft skills, which I think sort of relates to what Sharon's talking about. Did you want to elaborate on that point?
Yeah, thank you. So I think, I guess just quickly on co-design, I think absolutely everything Sharon said I think is right, and understanding how these. I mean, it's not a question I don't think about AI per se. It's more about change management and how do you do effective change management. It's being brought to the forefront because the driver of change is AI, and it's happening rapidly and kind of expensively. So I was going to say, I think there's been a kind of a mad rush towards obtaining AI skills. So whether that's as an individual or as an organization, and I think that's maybe over-indexed a little bit. So AI skills, I think, are certainly important. Different organizations will need them in different capacities, but under-indexed the skills needed to use. Skills needed to understand how AI drives value across the business, outcomes for customers, workers, and citizens. So I don't know how, for example, how effective AI is really going to be without the kind of commensurate skills in strategy, management, risk, foresight, innovation, collaboration, change management, a long list of those kind of soft skills that support what's being implemented along the way. And if you look at any kind of top 10 list of skills that are most in demand, it's always going to include things like critical thinking, problem solving, communications. It's resilience is probably a big one at the moment. So yeah, I think everyone. So I don't think everyone has to run out and grab AI skills per se, but they need to kind of really index on those. There's a series of papers coming out of the big business schools now about how Gen AI is being used in organizations. And generally what they're saying is that Gen AI is being used quite widely by most new hires in knowledge, in the knowledge economy to some degree, right? That's probably no surprise. What is maybe a bit of a nuance on that is what the studies are saying about how AI is being used, how it's being used, and kind of how effective it is. So it's typically either being used as either an executor, so they're helping to write, summarize code, translate, etc., or as a thought partner for brainstorming, problem solving, challenging ideas. And I think that dichotomy probably poses a lot of questions for organizations about how to lean in and support workers kind of with that. And that's, so in terms of co-design, how are you going to use these tools? What are you doing? All of a sudden you have a Gen AI assistant there. Are you feeding it the right information, code? What are you doing with the data? How are you keeping that secure, privacy? Are you asking the right questions? Do you understand its limitations? Do you understand its potential? All those things. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Tim. James, I might dovetail from that into the next question and throw this one to you, but obviously please jump in, panelists, wherever you would like to. So this is a question put up by Tracy. Thank you, Tracy, who says, like we've just heard from our panelists, we know that people are really essential to the design and implementation of technology. That's pretty clear from research going back, over decades. But what do we really need to do differently for us to actually put this into practice more broadly? James, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I think it absolutely needs to start with having a clear and coherent plan around what purpose it's being used for. And that needs to be fully integrated into the strategy. And then therefore you can actually understand what skilling is required to maximize the investment. And so for starters, that discussion we've just had around the incorporation of AI, it can be fantastic at giving people a greater level of data analysis to help leaders make more informed decisions. But with that comes the watch out of, Tim mentioned privacy concerns, biases within results, the use of unedited or unmeasured outputs. These are the types of things that require that uniquely human approach to understand and use the tool for what it is, but then overlay it with an experience and a value process, and then also the change process. So bringing people along for the ride. And like you said, it's not just AI, it's almost any technology. For as long as I've been working, the adoption of a new technology or a new system without a proper change process and without getting hearts and minds and the what's in it for me around how it creates capacity or how it allows me to do more of what I love, just results in system rejection or not a huge amount of uptake. And then you spend hundreds of hours encouraging people to utilize this thing that was brought in for their benefit, but they weren't properly engaged, and therefore it's a really hard task to get them to fully utilize it.
May I jump in, Melissa, if that's okay?
Absolutely.
Tracy also asked about what's sort of different, I guess. And one thing I think that is different with the contemporary technology is the fact that it is more self-learning. So we've got systems that can make decisions without human input increasingly. And that presents some important challenges. So, I mentioned before that there have been some fairly dramatic failures. One of those is robo-debt, and people in Australia know what that failure was about. And fundamentally what happened with robo-debt, there were lots of factors, right? There were political issues and blah, blah, blah. One of the most important things, though, is that the human was left out of the decision-making loop. Okay, so decisions were made, important decisions were made about the level of people's debt without any human oversight or judgment. That's one of the risks that really needs to be carefully managed into the future. As these technologies become more able to operate autonomously without any human input. And so that comes back to the A in the SMART model, the agency of humans. Actually, we used to call it autonomy, but I had too many conversations with people in the mining sector. And when they talk about autonomy, they mean machine autonomy. I'm talking about human autonomy. So I did just want to mention that because I think that is presenting some unique challenges into the future that we really need to think about.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sharon. We might go to the next most voted question at the moment, which is really about that connection piece that we have sort of touched on a little bit. Wendy Muir, thank you for this question. The question is, what's the number one thing that global companies can do to assist relationships, connection, and support across globally spread organizations? Tim, maybe I'll start with you, given you've got a big global organization. How does Amazon Web Services think about establishing that connection when obviously you're dispersed across the globe?
Yeah, sure. And not just dispersed across the globe, but dispersed across Australia as well. I think it's probably, I don't know, it's probably my answer here is probably communications, right? So I often don't know where the person I'm engaging with is based. A lot of my interactions happen over Slack or other kind of collaborative Teams type platforms. And building those kind of communities of practice, and a lot of it's about sharing of information and kind of this is what's working here and what's working there, and that kind of constant communication is I think is key. Maybe what I'll say is we have a kind of a saying here that good intentions aren't enough. You need mechanisms, and so everybody has good intentions, and you kind of you actively go and you try and do your best. Everyone's trying to do their best, and I think that's true organization wide. But it's probably not enough. I think what you need to do is that you see an opportunity for collaboration, or you see that a need within the business to make sure that teams are linked and kind of across geographies or within a geography or across silos, different business units. And you see a need for greater communication or greater collaboration, then you need to kind of build a mechanism to make sure that happens. And that mechanism is a tool. What it needs is adoption, and it needs inspection as well. So understand the output that you're trying to achieve, and then how do you get there? But how do you get there in a way that you're able to spin out the data and say, is this working? Are we doing this right? And who's accountable to that? I'm not sure if that was a good answer, but that's, I guess, how I see it working. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tim. James, Sharon, did either of you want to jump in on that collaboration connection piece?
I guess I would just add the importance of a clear shared goal, because there's nothing that fuels a team than having a very clear shared goal. so everyone knows why they're actually together and what the purpose is. And then, as Tim says, then you need a mechanism for facilitating that coordination in the most appropriate way. And, we've learned a lot over the years about how some forms of communication, which are more expensive perhaps, things like face-to-face communication, are better for some tasks. Tasks that more may revolve around decision-making or conflict and so on. And then other sorts of mediums are more appropriate for other tasks. Brainstorming is actually very well achieved through more digital forms of communication. So have your clear goal and then identify the best mechanisms, as Tim said, for getting there.
Mm.
It's
One
funny.
extra thing
I was just going to jump in on the clear goals just before jump in. I think that's absolutely right. It's funny. Amazon is a very large company. Over 1.5 million people are working for Amazon. I don't think it necessarily feels like that from the inside. We have we try and restrict things to what we call a 2-pizza team. So enough people that you can fit around the table and feed them 2 pizzas, right? So that's mostly the interactions that I have. It's very deliberate. It promotes autonomy. It keeps everyone focused around that clear goal and allows for that kind of rapid reaction as well. So communication from the top level, but kind of on the day-to-day, it's a kitchen table. Yeah. Sorry, Tim.
No, and 2 things. If we've got the clear goal, we've got the things that are structured in order to be able to aid that collaboration. And so whether that's, and to Tim's point, the rise in agile workforce methodologies to ensure people to be able to move quickly and remove layers and spans of controls that are actually blocking outputs. But the final thing I wanted to add was just that every organization, and this is more the informal, will have individuals and leaders, and investing in leaders that we know are going to be culture carriers or ambassadors of your culture. And these people are often a very loud voice. And they're the people who are the ones who adopt, are more change ready, and can really influence those around them. And to neglect that these people exist and to not work proactively with them and actually enable them and give them the license to go and spread the message and reward them and celebrate them for it is a mistake. So we've called them a range of different things, culture ninjas, culture ambassadors, but they are absolutely critical in actually driving the right behaviours and aligning people to get them, A, to utilise the mechanisms available, and B, help with that greater understanding rather than just top-down messaging when it comes to the strategy and the outcome that we're after.
Yeah, really good point. Thanks for that, James. There's a few questions coming in now to narrow our focus on the Australian regulatory environment specifically. Terry's got a question here. It says, we've had a lot of recent changes in the regulatory environment when you think about right to disconnect legislation, the increased accountability for psychosocial safety. How is management and leadership responding to these recent changes?
Maybe that's a good one for me to kick off on, Melissa.
Yeah.
So first of all, actually the legislation in the work health and safety domain, it's always been there. Employers have always had a responsibility for at least the last 30 years, but it's become clearer. And it has absolutely sharpened the focus of many organisations. So we work with many different companies who are worried. And so it's been good in the sense that it's driven more focus on this important topic. I guess one of the observations is that we are seeing a slow shift away from focusing on how do we support people who have got mental health challenges at work. So, if people are coming to work with problems, anxiety or depression or whatever, how do we know? So how do we get people to share? How do we have that psychologically safe culture? How do we then accommodate that? And how do we support people? So that's been the dominant focus of organisations. But if you look at the work health and safety legislation, it goes further than that. And it says you must make sure that you do not cause harm through your work practices. So this is where we get into issues like excessive demands, long working hours, or lack of control. All of these things, employers now have a responsibility to understand if they are problems and address them. So that's really created a big shift, and we're seeing more and more organisations say, okay, I understand, I know we've got psychosocial hazards in our workplace, but what do we do about it? How do we address that? And that's where we're working with them quite a bit around this area of work design. Okay, lack of control, and both Tim and James, you've talked about the importance of an environment where people have got autonomy and are a bit more empowered. That's a hard shift to bring about. So how do we then work with organisations to do that? So that's, I guess, one thing I would say is that there's this slow movement away from just focusing on people are coming to work with problems to saying, oh, actually, we as employers, managers might be creating problems. So what are we doing about that? And that is really brings us much more into the territory of organisational change, of digital technologies, what's going to be the impact of digital technologies on work and so on. So it's becoming a much more strategically important idea, I would suggest. At least if we move away from a tick-the-box compliance exercise, which by and large is not going to address the hazards in work. It's really going to require a bit more of a systems type of approach.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sharon. James, do you have a perspective on the reaction from leaders to the current regulatory environment that they find themselves in?
Yeah, look, I do. And I think the change, as Sharon's just indicated, is probably an extension on something that's always existed. But the perspective I'd like to share is it begins by actually listening and understanding your people. And so there are a variety of different ways that people indicate or seek feedback from their employees. The most classic example is the employee engagement surveys. But the old rule of don't ask the question unless you have the capability and ability to respond then leads to, and one of the main reasons we get engaged to support organisations to help develop their leaders is because do those leaders then have the toolkit and the capacity to do what is needed? And it's everything from, work design to supporting, processes around people's development to understanding and educating individuals to be able to have greater emotional intelligence to understand that everyone's change journey is different. How do I respond and support that as a leader? These are all components that begin by listening to your specific organisation, the concerns of your employees, and then having a leadership group that can address it, because there isn't a one size fits all. And if you're not listening to your people, you don't necessarily know which elements are most pertinent to you.
Thanks so much, James. I think it's a really, really important point. There's a question here that's had a few votes from Tracy speaking about if we could use the regulatory environment to think about motivating businesses when it comes to better change management. So she's saying, boards are now sitting up and paying attention to psychosocial risk, and regulation has played a part in sort of pushing them in that direction. Is regulation something that could help to affect better change management and ensure boards are actually motivate their CEOs and invest effectively in engaging the people affected in change to achieve the productivity improvements that we need to see in our economy? Do you think regulation is important in the change management sphere, or is this something that should be put back on businesses?
Maybe I'll begin. I mean, that old adage of what gets measured gets done is the first thing that springs to mind here. And so is regulation the most appropriate tool? Yeah, sometimes. Is measuring and rewarding your leaders through performance management and processes attached to outcomes financially the most important thing to do it? It's probably a bit of a mix of all of the above. But I mean, ultimately, if something is important, you need to begin by measuring it. You need to be clear about which behaviours you want to see and drive. And then you need to reward, not always financially, but you need to reward in some way, shape or form, the adoption and promotion of those behaviours.
And I would just reiterate, agree with those points, James. And I have to say, just very anecdotal evidence, but, the number of presentations I am invited to give to the board about the topic of work design, is way greater. And it's because boards are saying, oh my goodness, there's a risk issue here if we don't deal with it. And so there is more attention, definitely. There's no doubt about that. And again, as with James, is this the best way? Who knows? But the fact is it's there. One thing I would say, and I always say this to boards as well, yes, we've got to look at risk and be compliant. But really what we're talking about is creating good work for people. We're talking about creating healthy, productive work. And James said it before, listening to people, actually, if that's the focus and you can turn the conversation around, yes, we're going to address psychosocial hazards in this process, but what we're really going to do is create that smart work or whatever other tool you use, but we're going to create good, healthy, quality work. And I think sometimes helping boards to see that there'll be benefits, not just for managing risk, but for that competitive advantage that we talked about at the beginning, because you're going to be creating a more agile workforce. You're going to be creating a workforce that can learn more quickly when you've got that quality work. So I think if we can shift the conversation a bit with boards to go a little bit beyond pure compliance, then we would be doing a good thing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sharon. I'm going to sneak in one more quick question before I ask for each of you to give me some final thoughts today, because we are nearly out of time. Just one question for you, James, specifically coming through on the chat. With your experience in providing C-suite executive support, what gaps are you seeing in their current toolkit and how can they look to bolster their strategies?
Yeah, the gap comes from, can you be across everything? So if you're working in the business, how much time and capacity is freed up for working on the business? And to pick up Tim's point before, we're seeing like this massive rush for a greater understanding when it comes to evolving and emerging topics. So most recently, getting training in a greater understanding of AI, and how that might impact, business and strategy. And seeing that play through in a rise in the number of executive advisor or deputy style roles put in place to enable subject matter expertise to be provided and to create capacity for the C-suite to go and seek the information they want to feel like they're making informed decisions. So to answer your question, I think it really is a capacity constraint issue. They can't be all things to all people, and the type of extra support that's required or the expertise that's required really, again, is dependent on the makeup of that individual's background and skill set, plus the makeup of their direct reports and their immediate team, and not being afraid to seek outside counsel and guidance when it comes to feeling like you have enough information to make the decisions that truly matter.
Thanks, James. We've got a couple of minutes left before we wrap up, so I might throw 1 minute to each of you just for some final overarching thoughts on the topic before we finish up. Tim, did you want to go first?
So I'm toying with this idea about AI jobs. And I want to kind of, for a while now, I've been pushing back on this idea of the digital economy. I say to people, there is no digital economy. There's just the economy and it's becoming more digital. And I think it's the same thing about AI jobs. There are no AI jobs. There are just jobs and they're increasingly using more AI. And I think that's the kind of prism that we need to start looking at some of these issues with. So everything is going to be kind of AI and health, AI and education, right? I think it's going to be attached to most things. And I do think we need to change the narrative a little bit from that perspective, right? So kind of shifting away from I need specialist skills to do AI, and then those people over there do AI. I think we need to change the narrative a little bit and start kind of putting out the signals about how to aspire, how to kind of encourage that next generation of workers coming through to think about how they're going to use the tools and kind of what it could take them, where it could take them. Yeah. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks so much, Tim. Sharon?
Yeah, well, just to build off Tim, I think some of the stats are that 30% of tasks in 60% of jobs, and that's probably changed that statistic already, but are going to be done by AI. So fully 100% concur. And that's why we're going to have these questions of work design more and more come to the fore of who should do what and how will they coordinate and so on. But I wanted to go back to the three themes that you introduced around sense, seize, and transform right at the beginning, Melissa. And I want to make a case for unleashing the talent of the front line in this equation. So you asked the question around leadership and what do they need to seize, sense and transform. I would argue we need the whole workforce. In other words, we need a more distributed sort of leadership model. Why? Well, if we think about sense, who's in touch with the reality? Who's in touch with the customers and the clients and the students or whoever the beneficiaries of the work are? It's the front line. So they're the ones who should be sensing the disruption the earliest. Seize is about seizing opportunities. So often we have our staff tied up in rules and bureaucracy and red tape. Actually, if we unleash people from some of that, they seize the opportunities. So it's not just left to leaders. And then finally, your third one was transform. And I guess, I love the word transform, and that's why I have a centre that I called the Centre for Transformative Work Design, because I think if we really pay attention to the quality of work at the front line through all levels of the organisation, leaders as well, then that's the only way, actually, that we can really achieve genuine transformation. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Sharon. We love our sense, seize, transform at CEDA. Appreciate you framing it in that way. James, final words from you.
Yeah, I think the takeaway for me is that the organisational goals and the goals of the employees are actually aligned. It's how we bring them together and fill the void in between, which is critically important. So I mentioned that individuals primarily just want control of their career. They want the ability to learn. They want the ability to do meaningful work. They want the more menial tasks taken away and to be able to focus on higher order stuff and human-centric skills. Organisations want an employee base that is actually going to shift and move and evolve with them to help them realise their strategic objectives and in the end provide better service for patients, customers, etc. And so on what Sharon just said, it's actually making sure that there's a good two-way dialogue, but it ultimately comes down to answering the question, what's in it for me from both sides? And so if you're going to evolve, train and upskill and ask people for discretionary effort, be very clear about what's required, what's the purpose, and what the benefit for them is going to be at the end. And I think if we can bridge that gap, then there's a real opportunity now more than ever to be able to move forward.
Thanks, James. That's a really nice note to finish on. Unfortunately, we're out of time today. I think one thing I've really taken away is that, and it's been supported both by the wonderful research that our speakers have been able to point to, but also your experiences of your own organisations and more broadly, is just stepping back and thinking about those fundamentals, the clear goals, putting people at the heart of everything, whether that's workplace design, new technologies and developing those, learning, new ways of working, and empowering and unleashing the potential within the individuals in your organisation, wherever that may be. So thank you so much to our panelists on behalf of CEDA and everyone here today. Thank you to James McIlvena, Sharon Parker and Tim Bradley for your time and your really candid and valuable insights. Thank you again today to today's major sponsor, LHH, for your support of today's discussion. Conversations like this one are really only possible due to the support of CEDA members, so we're really grateful for LHH having supported the discussion today. And thank you to our audience, to everyone on the call for your participation. Everybody today will receive an email with a link to the recording of today's discussion, and that link will also be available on the CEDA website in about a week's time. So feel free to share that with your networks and listen back to those valuable insights that we've had today. As always, you can keep up to date with the full program of CEDA events and register for those upcoming events by visiting our website. A few things to draw your attention to coming up in November, a few real-life face-to-face events. On the 4th of November in Sydney, we have Frank Calabira, CEO of Origin Energy, to share his views on the major trends shaping the energy sector in its transition to cleaner, smarter energy systems. And then on the other side of the country, on the 20th of November in Perth, we have the Western Australian State of the State with a focus on mining and energy. And also the following week in Perth on the 26th of November, an update on the Westport and Western Trade Coast initiatives. So don't miss those if you happen to be in Sydney or Perth. And as always, keep an eye out on the website. That brings us to a close. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.